It's the 29th day of January 2024. I got no idea what I was just going to say. I lost track. It was just the whole world stopped for a second. It was epic. And then boom, we're back to reality. Hello, reality. Let me explain what reality actually is. It's a doozy, I can tell you that much. The medias, and I show this picture almost every day. Nobody else is showing it for some reason. Dana's doing a pretty good job. He got her. No! Imagine if everybody was to tweet this here to Greenpeace, because Greenpeace blocked me worldwide, all the Greenpeace, because I tweeted them this picture. That's the end of the nuclear industry right there, that picture. Because the people to your right are representatives of the major medias. It's just a fraction of the people that done this. Are claiming they're in a fuel pool at the top of a building that doesn't even exist. That's Reactor 4. This is Reactor 1. There's nothing left. The building actually blew up. Blew up over there. Okay, so Reactor 2 blew up, but it kind of stayed intact. But you can see the heat signature at the top of it. And the reactor core has gone deep into the earth in the proverbial China syndrome. There's Reactor 3. This is the detonation of Reactor 3. You're going to see big pieces falling back to Earth while the plume keeps rising. But see these big pieces? That's the fuel pool in the reactor cores of Reactor 3.
And you know well at Chernobyl, the helicopter pilots that came in and that deposited the heavy materials to try to put down that fire, which all died from radiation exposure. Here's a decision question.
It was heroism.
During this operation, 600 pilots are fatally contaminated with radiation. All of them will die. But their efforts only buy a few days. Although it has been covered over, the fire still isn't out.
All 600 helicopter pilots died in the first couple of weeks at Chernobyl. And that's why they didn't send the helicopter pilots. I gotta fix that picture. That's why they didn't send the helicopter pilots into Reactor 3 and 4. In 2013, this is what Reactor 3 and 4 looked like. And so the question is, why did they leave these stumps there? These are the very bottom of the buildings. There's nothing left. The media, of course, came out and said, oh, we got the fuel out of the fuel pool. And every academic on the entire planet, when they seen that picture from the nuclear industry, scientists and academics, nuclear engineers, nuclear scientists, they all laughed at you because you believed that the fuel pool was there. They were laughing big time. And the repercussions were right away. There was 865,000 extra cancers in the first year. And just for reference point, the fuel pools are at the very top of the buildings. I don't know if you noticed it, but the top is gone. These are 190 foot, 65 meter, 19-story buildings, and they're 50 meter, 150 feet wide. And the stump you see to your left, it's hard to wrap your mind around it. I get that. And so this piece here, the top part right there, is this piece right here. So there's 4 pieces. That's one of them. The fuel pool is at the very top of the building. And this piece here, because hopefully that gives you scale, that piece there, if you take both of these stumps, Reactor 3 and Reactor 4, stack them on top of each other, they're still not as tall as the bottom piece of the Kevlar sarcophagus frame, which is identical building to 3 and 4. In other words, the fuel pools were at the top of the building, so it's gone. So ask yourself the question of why did the world's media come out and pretend that they're in a building that doesn't exist, a nuclear reactor? And when you ask yourself that question, you're left with one possibility. Because the endless nuclear radioactive fallout is the biggest threat to the species and humanity, and has cascaded us into an extinction level event due to the species. And so every academic on the planet, when they've seen reactor 1 and 3 explode, they knew the fuel pools and the reactor cores were gone. But for almost 13 years now, they have lied to you. And for 80 years, they have mocked you, claiming now that the fuel pools were recovered from a building that doesn't even exist. But this is some of the fuel pools. This is a model from France. This model is based upon... This model is based on 20 days. And at 20 days, the radiation covers the entire planet like a snowstorm, except it pulses energy every second, and it never goes away. On July the 13th, 2023, last year, a professor of the Department of Nuclear Quantum Engineering, Young Sung Il, from South Korea, made the first English statement we've heard of the new version, which was the International Atomic Energy Agency's version. They're just regurgitating United Nations little monster known as the IAEA. They claimed that nothing got out of the destroyed buildings. Nothing got out of these buildings whatsoever. And what did was in 2 tanks, or 1,000 tanks, was equal to 2.2 grams of tritium, which is the last isotope you're worried about, but you definitely want to be worried about it, despite the fact that what they're telling you is a complete lie. And that the discharges into the ocean from 4 nuclear meltdowns and 8 fuel pools that burnt. We've never seen a single full reactor meltdown before, 100%. Even though we're sure it happened. So each of the reactors in Japan, not counting the fuel pools that had 10 reactor cores at the top of the buildings, each of the reactors just themselves are equal to 100 Chernobyls and are certainly worse than all nuclear meltdowns in history combined. But for a professor of quantum and nuclear engineering, to suggest that the emissions from multiple nuclear meltdowns was equal to 3 grams of sugar going into the ocean. There are species out there that eat their youngs, and unfortunately humans are not one of them. Last night's video, after 1 minute we had 35 views and 41 thumbs up. We had 144 views, so normally I would get about 120 views instead of 33. And this was the poll from last night. Should Japanese move out of Japan to mitigate the Fukushima radioactive fallout snuff machine? Think about that statement. Think about why I framed it that way. And the video last night was 2 hours, 5 minutes, and 3 seconds. And 12 hours later, it jumped to 2 hours, 5 minutes, and 10 seconds. So it gained another 7 seconds. And as far as I know, I'm the only person on YouTube whose videos get longer after 12 hours. Okay, so we're going to pick up. And hi, everybody. We're going to pick up where we left off last night. We got around 300 pictures to get through on top of that. So this first part is where we left off last night. Let's jump into that. We got a crazy story about Shika nuclear power plant to cover. And we got some interesting pictures we're going to get to. So let's talk about some of these headlines. Nuclear agency abandons sending low-level nuclear waste to local landfills. This is a 2020 story, by the way. After a storm of criticism, the Federal Nuclear Regulatory Commission this month abandoned its proposed reinterpretation, that would have allowed commercial landfills to stop accepting low-level radioactive waste. And low-level radioactive waste is still very, very dangerous. It's just not a lethal dose in a matter of seconds. But it's still a lethal dose over 10 or 20 years. Once you get it in your body, it attacks your cells relentlessly for the rest of your life. In lieu of the nation's fourth licensed facility. Andreev Bay, which is in Russia, was former Soviet Union fueling station for nuclear submarines. Cleanup reaches a landmark in dangerous nuclear fuel removal process. This is a 2019 story. Used nuclear fuel assemblies, which have been lined for decades at the bottom of Building 5, at the bottom of the fuel pool is what they're talking about, an aged and dilapidated fuel store at the Russia's Andreevia Bay, have been removed and secured. That's very misleading, by the way, as you'll see coming up. And these Geiger counters you're looking at can't possibly quantify the radiation in the area. And they're measuring microsieverts. The fuel pools are outdoors, so they're hemorrhaging radiation because the fuel is still splitting atoms. And not only that, to suggest that it's only 0.42, my contempt for the nuclear industry is so... I have so much contempt for these perpetual lawyers. These are just... They're destroying humanity. They're the blight of humanity. They're the cockroaches of humanity. And Riva Bay opened in 1961 as a refueling station maintenance base for the Soviet nuclear submarines. Over the next quarter of a century, the site amassed some 22,000 nuclear fuel assemblies. The typical assemblies are for the boiling water reactors around 1,800 pounds. These assemblies, I'm not sure how much they weigh. Many badly damaged. And these are words you never want to hear when it comes to a fuel assembly. Before it was closed in 1992 without adequately planning to handle the contamination that could emerge. But like the fuel pools were outdoors with no containment. Abandoned. Like Sellafield, Windscale. Like Donneray. Except it's it's actually worse than them. And they're all just horrifying amounts of releases because they're splitting atoms. In 1982, that contamination came to the fore when the site's new notorious Building 5 started leaking. Every time I heard the word leaking in nuclear, like if somebody was to make a rubber nuclear scientist, I'd have it here every show in a headlock and punch it in the face the whole show. And if you get to choose to put a face on a rubber nuclear scientist that I can punch in the face, it would be Rod Adams, I think. He's one of the most despicable scumbags I've ever come across. And the Breakthrough Institute, scumbag from the Breakthrough Institute. And Michael Schellenberg. And actually, the list is quite long. So it shouldn't be a rubber. If it was it should be like a target for the gun range is what it should be. Threatening to dump a toxic slew of plutonium, uranium, and other fission, 1,000 other fission products into the Litsa Fjord, only 50 kilometers from the Norwegian border on the Barents Sea, where they scuttled and dumped 18,000 nuclear dumps, including multiple nuclear submarines with reactor cores stuffed into some of them and scuttled. It's a despicable industry. There's no other way. They're disgusting. It's a disgusting industry. It's a 100% criminal enterprise, and everybody involved in it is just revolting. And just before we went live, I was like, why does my throat get so dry the last couple of shows? And I realized I haven't been putting my lemon juice into my water. And so just before we went live, I put lemon juice into the water. And I think that'll get us through the night, and then hopefully I get back on the ball. Technicians at the base rushed much of that nuclear fuel into a temporary containment structure at the site and cemented it in. And arranged that over time became permanent. Technicians rushed let me read it again. Most of the nuclear fuel into temporary containment structures at the site and cemented it in. So they put it in some kind of containment, which is a fuel pool. Then they built a cement structure over it and sealed it. It's just unbelievable. Still, other fuel at Andreeva Bay was stored in the open. For decades, unshielded from the harsh Arctic elements. So if you wonder why the Arctic has so much radioactive fallout everywhere, guess one of their biggest stupid nuclear industry, just stupid scumbags. The condition of the neglect, the nuclear industry knew what was going on. Nuclear industry knew exactly what they were doing. The condition of the neglect led many degenerate experts to fear that the radioactive morgue might spark an uncontrolled chain reaction and explode. Because the splitting atoms is sealed in, it builds up all this noble gases and isotopes, and when you introduce oxygen back into it, it detonates. The slow motion nuclear disaster continued to unfold in near secrecy, because if you told that, everybody would cancel nuclear right away worldwide, so people knew what was going on. The industry is just, it's a plague. It's a parasite and a plague to humanity and the 8 million species. And brought it to the international attention in 1996. It's just unbelievable. One of the most significant problems described by the report was what remained in Building 5, which is a lie because they're all vicious, after its initial leak, and the leak was vicious amounts. They call it a leak. They do this at every event. They'll call it a leak. And I think anybody with a nuclear accident calls it a leak should get 100,000 years in jail. And when they die, their family should have to serve out the rest of their sentences. Although the intact fuel assemblies have been removed, the intact ones, and then brought up to MIAC and reprocessed into mixed oxide fuel or nuclear weapons, significant volumes of the radionuclides and the damaged assemblies. So what do you mean significant volumes of radionuclides? I don't know if I've ever heard it framed that way for this scenario before. They're trying to downplay it, obviously. And damaged assemblies. The best description for them now is volatile. Remain in the sludge. This is not sludge. If I took a little cup of it and put it at the best at a restaurant, like a McDonald's or whatever, every 20 minutes, everybody in the restaurant would drop dead. And I can do that for 1 million years with just a little tiny cup, little teacup that a child would use of this stuff. This sludge of the structure's storage pools. These are not storage pools. These are death machines. These are hemorrhaging radiation. Everything in these so-called pools is hemorrhaging, is splitting atoms. Like, it's It's so important. It's so devastating to every species and everything with replicating cells. It's heartbreaking. It's just heartbreaking. These stories are heartbreaking. The implications of the emissions is just, to me, right, I just see just destruction of the species and sterilization of the species. The used fuel will be transported to the atom float, the nuclear icebreaker port near Murmansk. And this is where they got 160 nuclear submarines ran up on the beaches and tied up the wharfs and abandoned because you don't know how to decommission. They weren't built to be decommissioned. And who knows how many they actually lost and didn't acknowledge. For onward transportation, storage, reprocessing at the Mayak. And the legacy of Mayak is stunning. It has contaminated the entire Urals, not just the southern Ural, but the vast areas we're talking about. And this runs all the way down to the Black Sea, of course. It never goes away. It never stops hemorrhaging out of there either. It's expected to be completed by 2028, which is quite, right? So when you get to the very last sentence, instead of saying everything is removed, they say the cleanup is expected to be completed by 2028. But Russia gave up on that when Ukraine's false flag event started, right? They stopped. And same thing with the cleanup of the Arctic Sea, where there's 18,000 dumps up there, including freighters stuffed with nuclear fuel and scuttled. What's wrong with these people, I wonder? Why do they hate us and planet Earth so much? Why do they work so hard to poison all the water on the planet so often and to poison it permanently? The Teo, which is the natives from Taiwan, want the nuclear waste off Orchard Island without delay. This is one of the strangest stories imaginable. So, Taiwan started up a nuclear power plants on that island. It's an island down right 100 miles from China. As far as China's concerned, that's China. So they have multiple nuclear power plants there. They gathered up a lot of nuclear fuel. But when they populated that island, they took the natives, the Tao people, and moved them out to Orchard Island. Because, they're better than everybody else. The Taiwan. So, after a while, they decided they needed a nuclear dump, and they went to the natives on Teo and on Orchard Island, and they said, we'd like to build a canning factory for tuna and salmon and stuff like that. And we're going to give you a stipend, each person in your community a stipend of maybe, I think it was several $1,000s a month or something. And so the natives were thrilled. They're not doing nothing. They're going to get a bunch of money every month, and everybody in the family is getting this money. For an impoverished community, that's a major deal, right? But instead of building a salmon and tuna factory, they built a nuclear dump, a nuclear waste site. And they moved all their nuclear waste there before the Tao people, the natives on Orchard Island, figured out what had happened. And today they're still fighting to get the nuclear waste off the island. And the Taiwan nuclear industry, you signed the paper. Yeah, but you said it was going to be a tuna factory for canning. That's too bad. We signed the paper. Think about what kind of scumbag, what kind of scumbag that the nuclear industry worldwide is to sit there in silence and let them get away with that. Because they didn't really sit in silence. They laughed. They're still laughing about it today. That's a big joke for them, right? How they sucked these people and poisoned them forever. Everything to do with nuclear, you just see this disconnect from being a human, a 100% disconnect. It's like, look over here, and then they dump nuclear waste in your children's playground. That's what they're like, right? That's how you should perceive them. They're there to hurt you. They're not there to be good. They have no attributes that are good for your humanity. Let's put it that way. 2,800 radioactive waste barrels found near the Baltic Sea And they didn't even know they were there. There was no record of them. They were stored carelessly on top of this. In other words, lots of them were broken open. Stored incorrectly in a repository for short-lived low and intermediate level waste 60 meters below the bottom of the Baltic Sea. So it was meant to be there permanently, and they can't quantify that assertion because they don't even know what was there. They don't know what's in the barrels. This story, man, this story. By the way, as soon as you're here, consider click in. Get your clicking in. Click in. Let's check the poll, actually, before I move on. Is the endless radioactive fallout the biggest threat to the species and humanity? And we got a massive 100%. Yeah, man. Japan's Fukushima nuclear plant further delays removal of the melted fuel debris. So this is you can see this arm, it unfolds, and the British and the Japanese built this arm, and they're not going to remove the melted debris. They're just going to remove like a granular, a little tiny speck of nuclear fuel. And nobody knows what the hell they're up to. But the minute that you put that in by the nuclear fuel is the minute you can... Like, if that went in by the nuclear fuel, that guy stood up there in the blue suit would drop dead. He couldn't stand up long enough to get his picture taken, and he would drop dead. Oh, it's Mari Yamaguchi from the Associated Press, a known degenerate from the nuclear industry, who usually is associated with the cover story. They'll come out and regurgitate it, and then the world will come out and repeat it forever. And so from the number two reactor, which we know burnt continuously for several days, TEPCO now is considering using a slimmer telescope-shaped kind of robot to start the debris removal. And about 880 tons of highly radioactive melted nuclear fuel remains inside the 3 damaged reactors. So their version is that the fuel pools are still there, that the reactor cores are still there, and then to suggest that there's only 880 tons after 40 years is... And the numbers keep getting smaller, you notice, every year for the last 13 years. It's just a despicable industry. It has no right to exist. It shouldn't be allowed to exist on this planet with me and you. TEPCO delays removal of the melted nuclear fuel at Fukushima plant. TEPCO, which is not a decommissioning authority, and that should be uppercase letters because TEPCO is an acronym, not a word. Delayed for a third time. Of course, you can't decommission. Now, these tanks are empty. The tanks were built in 2013. By July of 2013, they had 1,000 of these tanks. And how many tanks they got today, 2024? 1,000 tanks. And just a single reactor could fill all of these tanks up 6 times a day, by the way. Just normal conditions. As I showed you at the beginning, I'll show you again in a second here. There is no buildings. Look at it. These people are pretending they're at the very top of a building that actually doesn't even exist. And all the media is all too happy to come out and regurgitate that particular lie. So everything is in the tanks. That's what they're saying. Everything that got out of the reactors is in the tanks. So everything that got out of these two reactors, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, is 2.2 grams. That's what got out of the buildings. So, like, if they were in a courtroom and you got a jury there, and you show the jury this picture, this is only just two of the reactors, not counting the fuel pools, which you're talking about millions of pounds per building, and you take the International Atomic Energy Agency to court, and you got a jury there, do you think the jury is going to believe the International Atomic Energy Agency's assertions that only 2.2 grams got out of there? And what do you think they're saying only 2.2 grams got out of there? So you don't blame them for the death of the species and your loved ones and your friends and your families and your communities and all the species and the whales and the birds and the insects. They're not hiding this because they're not, like, they're all the producers, the editors, the owners of ABC Australia, the owners of BBC, all the people that work there, all of them have to play a part. All the media has to go along with this story for that story to work. If there's any dissenting voices, if any of the media came out and said, they're all lying, they're not on top of the building, why are they doing that? Because it's an extinction event. So any media can beat them up. If Greenpeace instead of blocking me, had tweeted out this picture and said, hey, woohoo, they're not being honest, that would have been the end of the nuclear industry. Someone powerful, I don't mean necessarily powerful, but somebody with a big reach, somebody with a lot of followers. And they're just completely lost in transition. Conor McGregor, what is it, 46 million followers or something on Twitter, is it? If he was to tweet out this picture and say the nuclear industry in Japan is lying to you, the major media is lying to you folks, that would be the end of the nuclear industry. There's no way the nuclear industry can recover from that. They can't recover from that. And when I created this picture, which 10 years ago or something, 9 years ago, I thought, I remember sitting there and putting this picture together. It's not a picture, it's a video. I'm going to play it for you, actually. And I remember saying to myself, I'm going to put that online, just this little clip, and that'll be the end of the nuclear industry. There's no way they can beat me. I got them. I got it right now. That's going to kick their ass. So let me play this clip for you. And it would if it ever had any reach, right?
Where I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor.
And so this is clearly they're not in the building that they claim they are. And Rupert Winfield Hayes at BBC also claimed he'd done the same thing in Reactor 3, and we covered that for 6 days straight. All the media, it was really something, and then they went silent. They never mentioned it again. We covered it 6 days. We come out and greased them for 6 days. Japan's Fukushima nuclear plant further delays removal of the melted fuel. This is literally the stupidest thing I've ever seen. And the media suggest that they're going to remove the fuel, but the reality of it is they're only going to try to get some granulars. And it's not even that. It's not about that task either. It's about removal of the melted fuel. That keep saying that over and over and over in the media. So people slowly start thinking that they're removing the fuel. But when the buildings don't even exist, how can you remove the fuel? But they won't even acknowledge the buildings are damaged. And how many other times have you done this that we missed? And then put everybody in paper suits. TEPCO says they burn 7,000 of these paper suits every day. 7,000. Because I remember we had done this video, and I was making fun for the whole week about paper suits, but on the Friday, I asked the question of, well, where's all the paper suits? And on Monday, a story came out from the NHK in Japan to say they burnt 7,000 paper suits every day in the incinerator on site. Never heard of it again. Officials inspect an area of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant in 2023. Well, this is not reactor 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, or 6. And just because you got people in paper suits, it's hard to quantify their inspectors. And that the equipment they're wearing can't filter radiation anyway. And the suits are pointless. They're literally pointless. In Unit 2. Right? So they're suggesting they're at, without saying anything, that they're at Unit 2, right? But this contraption, all it does is go straight in and come straight back out. It doesn't go in and maneuver all around or anything like that. It goes straight in, a pipe, no less, and it grabs a little granular and it comes back out. And that's all it's meant to do. But it's meant to make you believe that they're going to get the fuel out of reactor 2. That's what it ultimately is. Designed to remove the melted fuel from the damaged reactor. Designed to remove melted fuel. Again, the minute that goes in there is the minute you can never get near it again. Ever. If it actually succeeds, it gets close to any kind of fuel, then it's so radioactive now that you'll never stand on the same deck. And if you take it and take it off the deck, you can still never go on that deck again. And by the way, that deck is supposed to be inside of a cover for reactor 2. That's on the outside of it, on the seaward side. And if that was true, you can never be stood up in there. So there's no way to assemble this inside the contraption alongside of reactor 2, which is right between reactor 2 and 3. You can't actually go in it. They just put this cover there, now they're claiming that they're in there. I despise every day. I said, well, there's no way I can ever despise the nuclear industry more today. Next day, sure enough, they find a way for me to despise them just a little bit more. And every single day, it's the same thing. Just a little bit more. Every day, you realize this is a despicable coward industry. It's 100% cowards. No redeeming qualities whatsoever. They're the absolute worst criminals humanity's ever seen. The only way to describe them is criminals. These are criminals. To suggest that a nuclear scientist is not a criminal is criminal. The government spent $52 million in developing the still unused robot arm. These are not robot arms. Slow progress threatens the decommissioning target of 2041. And see, all of this is suggesting it's going to be used to decommission the reactors. But this is not going to be used to decommission the reactors. Ludicrous to suggest it. How is that going to decommission the reactors that don't exist anymore? Further delays in decommissioning could increase costs, which have already ballooned to 23 trillion yen, including the victim compensation. The majority of people got no compensation. Or if they lost, a lot of people lost their homes that they've had in their family for hundreds of years, and they got $1,000. It's 212 billion Canadian dollars. That doesn't come close to the pollution of the entire country. You polluted the entire country. The entire country of Japan is polluted. Excuse me. Let me show you some of that, just so you can wrap your mind around that statement. Because otherwise they're going to say, well, why didn't Dana show you any evidence? Because He always shows evidence, so he's lying. Dana's stop lying, Dana. Stop lying, Dana. Just Japan is crazy. I don't know how to describe it. Nuclear industry is insane. You can't get a job unless you're insane. An insane mass murderer. High level of radioactive material found in Tokyo. 170,000 atoms per kilogram in the sewage. 170,000 atoms. Fallout from Fukushima causing problems 180 kilometers away. It's all become no good. Contaminated wild vegetables, fish, wild game. 180 kilometers from Fukushima, Daiichi alpha particles at 200 counts per minute. Daiichi Elementary is 4 million atoms per square meter of cesium, not counting uranium, plutonium, curium, and everything else, in soil samples from schools in Chiba, which is only 20 kilometers from Tokyo. And then they have the gall to suggest that it's 10 microsieverts at another elementary school. It's a despicable industry, isn't it? 27,000 atoms per kilogram of cesium, and the Becquerel is the pulse of energy from each atom every second. That's the best way to look at it. It's worse than that by far, but that's being fair. You're being fair by suggesting 200 kilometers from the meltdown. This is forever. These areas need to be abandoned forever. Tokyo area turned out to be as contaminated as Fukushima. Air samples in Tokyo 270 times more contaminated with the cesium-137, and if anybody been around a while knows how much I hate the word cesium. They've used that to dummy you over 80 years now. The global weapons fallout peak. So when your air samples in Tokyo is 270 times more contaminated with gamma, cesium-137, than global weapons fallout peak, it's time to abandon the country. You need to abandon that country. Forecasts show, and don't eat food from that stupid idiot country known as Japan. Forecast shows Tokyo under radiation threat on Sunday. Well, it's permanent, isn't it? It never goes away. The Krypton 85 over Tokyo, March the 15th, reactor number 3 with mixed oxide fuel exploded, the plutonium mixed oxide fuel. And so the numbers were around 400,000 counts per minute. And by the way, we've seen the same thing over North America, Canada, and United States, sustained. 300,000 plus atoms per square meter, radioactive iodine-131, I'm assuming, yeah, deposited in areas near Tokyo. And the idea of using iodine-131 because it has an 8-day half-life, and there's 10 half-lives, and therefore it's all gone by 80 days. And originally, the first year, the majority of the pundits and the experts that they were rolling out would suggest that banana is more radioactive than that. And so for the first year, I come out and curb stomped everybody with a video that said that I can find. Just come out and I blast them. I put them on blast. And I literally, I tore into everybody. And within 2 years, literally nobody would mention the word banana. Maybe once a year after that. But it used to be 7, 8, 9 times a day. And potato chips and walking in the sunshine. And I was vicious. I was vicious. Anybody who's been around knows how bad I really was. Like, I was vicious. I hated them. I publicly hated on them. High radiation levels near Tokyo linked to Fukushima. Well, where else is it going to come from? Shit for brains. Rain caused 29 million atoms per square meter in the soil. These are stunning. These are runaway now. Just runaway screaming. Ah! Like, you do not go back. When you see these numbers, this is not a place you go back to. You just leave everything behind. Just run away and count your blessings if you don't get sick, violently debilitating illnesses over the next year or two. I mean, there's 865,000 cancers in the first year. What do you think was happening? Tokyo drinking water is unsafe for infants. That's the gallows laugh. If it's unsafe for infants, it's unsafe for everybody else. It's such a stunning announcement, right? Tokyo drinking water is unsafe. It can't just be unsafe for infants. My God. Like, how cruel can you be? That shows you the depravity of the nuclear industry right there. The cruelness to suggest that just baby, and the government was bringing out bottled water for children. In 2019, there was a study done showing congenital malformation, open heart surgery on neonates and infants was 14.2% per 100,000. 14,200 neonates and infants needed open heart surgery. There's unbelievable numbers per 100,000 live births across the country. This is unbelievable. That's an unbelievable number, what we're talking about. It's like it's unheard of. It's inconceivable pre-Fukushima. It's true about 70% of the Japanese territory is polluted by the Fukushima radioactive material. Tokyo contaminated with highly toxic radiation. Experts worry about catastrophic impacts on health. And so the administration in South Korea at that time was fairly honest. The current administration is a degenerate bunch of goblins. Local government, 276,000 atoms per kilogram of radioactive per kilogram. So multiply that by 64 to get a square meter. From soil samples near Tokyo and Kashiwa, almost 18 million becquerels a square meter. I'm just going to humiliate myself here now. Hang on. So 18 million divided by 270,000 divided by 270,000 is 0.0000. Oh, too many. That equals 66.66666. No big surprise. Per square meter. And why do a lot of those numbers end up looking like that? How often have we seen numbers like this show up when we do their official numbers? It's quite a coincidence, isn't it? So I say 64, but it's actually 66.66666666666. Yippee-ki-yay. Per square. So you got to multiply by 66.6, whatever the kilogram is, to get a square meter. Sue me, I was off by 1.6. Cesium levels spiking with unusually, but it sounds so better to say 66.666 to get. Right? Whatever number you give in a kilogram, you got to multiply by 66.66666 to get a square meter. Right? So whatever number they give you per kilogram, you multiply it by 66.6666666 to get a square meter. I'm just trying to imprint that back into my mind, because that's a stunning revelation on its own. So Tokyo is up to 300,000 becquerels a square meter, home to the world's largest drinking water reservoir of its kind for 36 million people. And they're talking about cesium levels spiking with unusually high amounts of fallout in Okototama. This is the degenerate Japan's time, by the way, on top of that. 300,000 plus becquerels a square meter radioactive iodine deposit areas near Tokyo before the end of March. That only includes the iodine 131. For every 131, there's 10 times more 132, 30 times more 133, 31 times more iodine 129. Oh, forgot to turn the volume down again. Tokyo area soil testing finds radioactivity up to Chernobyl's relocation levels, 990,000 becquerels a square meter. These are all run away and never come back. All of these numbers. Just one of these numbers is run away and never come back. All of these numbers, you're retarded if you don't run away. And the nuclear industry made sure that you couldn't run away because they could hid it away from you. But look at the descending voices in that first couple of years, right? The funny uranium and zirconium in the Tokyo residents' fingernails were all becoming nuclear fuel. Government simulation showed radioactive plume of krypton-85 over Tokyo. And krypton-85 is a nasty isotope, by the way. 40,000 microsieverts, 40 millisieverts, 40,000 microsieverts per hour at Tokyo supermarket. In addition to multiple spots on properties with over 100 microsieverts per hour. Uranium-235 found in Chiba. Neutron rays were measured in Tokyo and can't be detected by Geiger counters. Not most Geiger counters, but like nothing we're ever going to own is going to detect it. My inspector's just going to get gamma. And they're very expensive on their own, right? What's my little darling running at over there? 170 kilograms per minute right now. Which is an evacuation zone for most nuclear plants pre-Fukushima, by the way. Because I can only measure gamma, so I got to multiply it. Realistically, I have to multiply it by 600 to get all the alphas, neutrons, betas, and x-rays. People in Tokyo, the black substance is here. It's on the roof, on the asphalt, on the concrete. It's everywhere on every surface. And what they're talking about is this algae that aggregates radiation. And these are hotspots. You stand up right there and you're getting nasty doses. So imagine what's happened to the school children because they're so low to the ground, right? Radioactive dust reported in Tokyo after recent fog at 4,000 becquerels a kilogram of cesium. The contamination never disappeared. Be careful. Well, they're only acknowledging gamma, right? And just one gamma. You can't just have one gamma. You got to have betas and alphas and neutrons, and by proxy, you got to have X-rays. You just can't have gamma. 50,000 becquerels a kilogram of radioactive gamma cesium found in the soil near Tokyo. It's terrifying. That sample was from the side of the street where children walk every day. Contamination in Tokyo suburbs are 3 times higher than areas 1 mile from Fukushima Daiichi. Significant contamination in Tokyo. Concentrations of strontium-90 at selected hotspots in Japan. And the list goes on and 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 on. And it just, it's shocking how much of it we've gathered up, right? Government session revealed 400,000 times normal radioactive xenon-133 levels in Chiba. The entire planet was buried in these radioactive plumes. Let's keep going here. Let's get back into it. TEPCO delays nuclear fuel removal. Japan's Fukushima nuclear plant further delays removal of nuclear fuel. Debris removal from Fukushima nuclear plant to be postponed again. The treated water plant discharges. Like on day one, the first pictures that we got edited was, say, this picture here, Reactor 3. So by day 6, everything was blown up and gone. Yeah, some remained, but the majority of the inventory was now particulated or atomized and aerosoled and released catastrophic plumes, a pulse event for the entire planet. and the 8 million species. So, like, when you look at Reactor 3, there's not a nuclear scientist on the entire planet who look at that and say the fuel pool and the reactor cores are intact. There's not one. But for 13 years, they have told you that not only is it intact, but they got the fuel out of the pool. And so when you see this picture, this infuriates me, this picture, suggesting that they're going to take the fuel, because it's going to go in that pipe into Reactor 2. See the tube? The real idea of it was, and if this is not, obviously not Reactor 2, because if that was Reactor 2, shit for Brainster would be dead right on the spot. And so they're suggesting fishing rod type device for debris removal. They're claiming the nuclear fuel is down here and that the nuclear fuel debris is up there, that the reactor is intact. These are insane people. You literally got to be insane to suggest it. Yukon Mountain report, good news for Nevada. They spent $22 billion on litigation alone at Yucca Mountain. And it turns out the Yucca Mountain has multiple, it had like a 4 on the Richter scale earthquake there just after they said they canceled it. And what they were going to do at Yucca Mountain was they were going to stuff it, you like this one, they were going to stuff it with air conditioners. And so the idea of the capacity for Yucca Mountain was, how much heat could the mountain hold for 200 years? That was the criteria for that mountain. And in order to get more fuel in there, they were going to put air conditioners in there. And so if you lose power, what do you think is going to happen? Everything's melting down to one time, right? First off, the last thing you want to do is put all your nuclear fuel in one place, because it's going to melt down at some point. And that point could be the next day. Like, still no end in sight for the Fukushima nuclear plant decommissioning work. Still no sight in it. And why are they showing us this? Like, why would you show us that? That's nothing to do with the reactors. That is. More than 1,000 tanks for storing the treated water lined up next to the number 1 reactor. The new facilities to stably store and process approximately 520,000 cubic meters of existing solid waste. What are we talking about here? Are being built by Reactor 5 and 6. I got no idea what they're talking about. 500 cubic meters is 1.144 billion pounds, by the way. So 1.15 billion pounds, basically. This is absurd. What the hell are we talking about? Because everything there is irradiated unimaginably, right? I got no idea what they're talking about. Reactor buildings are still inaccessible due to high radiation. That's interesting, because we've seen all kinds of pictures of people in the reactors that don't even exist on top of that. Like, the Reactor 2 went China syndrome. The steam coming out of the ground at Reactor 2. Workers say the ground under the Fukushima plant is cracking and the radioactive steam is coming up. This steam you've seen in the background is 40 times the original speed, which was like 5 times the original speed. And so the whole site disappears in radioactive lethal doses at 10 sieverts per hour at 6 places. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose to a human. So 6 places, the steam coming out of the ground was 10 sieverts an hour, which is 3 times the lethal dose. But that's what the Geiger counters, the maximum, the stationary Geiger counters can read. Now, once you hit those numbers, those Geiger counters are broken. You need to send them back to get recalibrated. But you can't send those Geiger backs to get recalibrated because they're so radioactive as lethal doses. Got to break out the bottle, peroxide. Forgot about that one. Maybe I can feel it can breathe much better right away. Treated wastewater, because it's just oxygen, right? Just water. Treated, but it's extra oxygen, so you just flood your body. You spray it on your jugular vein and just flood your body with oxygen, which is really good for killing viruses and pathogens in your blood. Treated wastewater and peroxide's dirt cheap, right? And there is no adverse side effects for peroxide, and your body doesn't become acclimated to peroxide. It's just adding oxygen to your body. It's a very temporary thing, but it's really good for you. Treated wastewater begins being discharged to the ocean in 2023. Like, to suggest that the water is treated is insane. It's literally criminal. And to suggest that nothing's been released until 2023 it's insane. That's the definition of insane, to suggest nothing got out of these buildings. And that's the official story from IAEA, which is UN, which shouldn't exist, which is not a regulatory agency. They don't have any authority in any country. Israel continues attacks in Gaza Strip. Man, they're vile, aren't they? What they got done to Gaza? That's just a despicable excuse for a human right there. Benjamin Netanyahu is a despicable scum. 26,000 dead, mostly women and children. And there's probably that many more buried under a city that doesn't exist anymore. And how can a country, the fourth biggest weapons producer on the planet, I might add, who have suppressed it, now they've just been found guilty of crimes against humanity, war crimes, genocide, in The Hague, right? They're despicable. And the people that support them are just despicable. Heartless scum. South Korea's Japanese seafood imports experienced the largest year-on-year decline since 2012. South Korea didn't ban the food from Japan until 2013. I can't even wrap my mind around that statement. South Korea imported Japanese fish and shellfish worth a combined $151 million in 2023, down 12% from a year earlier. In 2013, South Korea banned all seafood imports from 8 Japanese prefectures near Fukushima. Like, why would you wait for 2 years? How do you get this evil, I wonder? Bruce Power among the top employers in Canada. Nuclear power plant. Bruce is disgusting. My God, they're disgusting people, aren't they? It is a proud moment known Bruce Power once again selected by his employees. Well, what are the employees supposed to select somebody else? Scumbags are $1,000, million a penny in the nuclear industry. Our employees take pride in the work they do in providing clean electricity and giving everybody cancer. I can't even read it. I start getting upset sometimes. It's best just to move on, Dana, before you lose it. Waste isolation pilot project. Why did they call it the pilot? Waste isolation pilot plant, the WIP. When it's actually the original, it was called a pilot project. It was just to dig a cavern. They're going to do tests down there to see what nuclear waste would look like in salt. Would you store your car in a salt cavern? If you had like a very expensive car, would you store it in a cavern of salt? There have been no fatal injuries from plutonium in the nuclear industry in the United States. Excuse me? No fatal injuries, you say? Well, let's look at the studies on the dogs. How many billion dogs, beagle dogs, and puppies have they killed? Alone? Not counting all the other species. So 144 beagle dogs were given a single inhalation of plutonium-238 And death from the radiation, yeah, death. Nobody has ever been hurt. Nothing's ever been hurt, they said. Everybody's got plutonium in them from just the idiot nuclear war they had. They call it nuclear testing, but it's nuclear war, right? In the United Kingdom, they kept all the children's teeth, baby teeth, and every one of them were loaded with plutonium. Death from radiation occurs from 1.5 to 5.4 years after exposure. Tumors of the lungs, the skeleton, and the liver occurred beginning about 3 years after exposures. Bone tumors found in 93 to 144 dogs were the most common cause of death. But they had 3 tumors. Lung tumors were found in 46 dogs, were the second most common cause of death. And liver tumors in 20 dogs. Occurred later than the tumors in the bones and the lungs. So typically they had 3 different types of tumors from the plutonium. They had lungs, bones, and livers. And tumors in the 3 organs often occurred in the same animal and were competing causes of death, and that the finding in the dogs suggests that similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in humans accidentally exposed to 238 plutonium. But the reality of it is that the human kidneys are 50 times less efficient than a dog's kidney at removing the plutonium. So the humans are 50 times more vulnerable than the dogs are. But by the way, the biggest byproduct, the curium isotopes are a major byproduct in irradiated reactor fuel. They're the major byproduct. And they also comprise a significant fraction of alpha-emitting radionuclides inventories. But they're the biggest byproduct in irradiated fuel. And so you need lead shielding 20 times thicker for plutonium, or for curium, than you do for the plutonium. And the plutonium is lethal to dogs, which are 50 times better at filtering it than a human is. There have been no fatal injuries from plutonium in the nuclear industry in the United States. There's been nothing but fatal injuries. Heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. All of these are because they want to claim that it's just the only thing you can get from radiation is cancer. Again, it's a lunatic industry, and its entire legacy is predicated upon lies. Waste isolation pilot project. Again, pilot project, not pilot plant, but pilot project. Waste isolation pilot project, WIP, which is Texas Health and Human Services. Waste isolation pilot project. When you start looking, it's waste isolation. Proposed waste isolation pilot project. This is 1981, 79 to 1981. Project, not plant. WIP, right? So now they're saying they changed that latter part of the acronym to plant. I don't know when they done it, but for a number of years, including the inception, it was referred to as the Waste Isolation Pilot Project. Period. Nuclear laundry dumping radioactive material in the Santa Fe sewage system. So that's another one where you get the so-called nuclear laundry. Well, Fukushima said they were burning 7,000 paper suits a day. But other nuclear sites, they're getting contaminated because they bring in a lot of transient workers. But rather than getting rid of the overalls they're wearing, they wash them and give them to the next homeless and destitute and victims of society and the immigrants that don't speak the language to use. And then they recognize that the laundry is a big, and this stuff is the laundry goes directly into the Santa Fe, for instance, sewage system. And a lot of the sewage is recycled into other stuff, right? And that the Santa Fe River and city is not required to monitor or treat the radioactive streams for radioactivity. And the radioactivity material may have contaminated the Santa Fe River as a result of the laundry operations. So there's so many facets that people don't comprehend. The WIP facility near Carlsbad will mine new space to dispose of the Fukushima waste, or the nuclear waste, rather. In 2014, I covered this in 2014 when it happened, a drum of waste ruptured and left portions of whips underground contaminated and unusable for future waste disposals. So a portion, they said it was kitty litter caused it. And the ultimate insult, eh? And there's footage out there of the plumes coming out of the shaft, the air vent. And so they have to replace the whole air system there, which is $500 million. But they still got all these transient workers now working back down there. It's still contaminated. And they're using it at 1/5 of the normal capacity. But it's radioactive. It's blown radioactive emissions down into the mine shaft. This is what he spent $500 million to rebuild a ventilation system. And still not up and running a decade later. Savannah River site contractors receive a very good and excellent rating. If they do get fines, then the government covers their fines when nobody's paying attention a couple of months later. They reimburse them. Oh, and they give them big bonuses, tens of millions of dollars. Now, the industry is completely out of control. It has to go where we're going to go, right? Survivors of Japan's Noto earthquake still living in shelters 4 weeks later. 14,000 evacuees today. 14,000 evacuees are still living in shelters. The tremors, these are not tremors. These were earthquakes. Also triggered widespread liquefaction. Tremors don't trigger liquefaction, earthquakes do. And there's only a slim possibility of most residents returning home. Think about that statement. There is only a slim possibility of the majority of the evacuees returning home. And we know they got 24,000 homes outside the prefecture, rented for 2 years for families, 24,000 families. So you're talking about 24,000 homes. Now, Ishikawa Prefecture was around, 41,000 homes were severely damaged or destroyed. But what about the other prefectures? We know the Niigata had around 6,700 homes that are destroyed through liquefaction, where the earth became so unstable. It's like quicksand. There is a slim chance, a slim possibility of most residents returning home. There is only a slim possibility. Let me put that in my collection because that's such an important facet to the story, right? So we got a big blizzard here right now. I was out plowing for a couple of hours. I gave up on it. I can't keep up with it. Oh, well, you get ahead of it a little bit, right? But we got a real live blizzard going on right now. Nasty stuff. It's nasty out there. I don't know what it's doing right now. I know it's starting to slow down it right now, around, hopefully, right now. But we still got 60 or 70 kilometer an hour winds. So it's going to be heavy blowing snow all night. And the wind changed halfway through the day, right? And so to a different direction. And that's the only reason I was out plowing with the quad. Survivors still living in shelters 4 weeks later. So now we got a couple of hundred pictures to get through. Let's start on that routine. And some of these, I'm not sure which ones, but some of these are like older stories that I was looking up. And I was trying to find older pictures, any pictures. And so some of this is going to be grainy. Because that's usually the only pictures they've been releasing, right? We're in day 29, but you can see the destruction right there, where they literally turned the matchsticks. And on this side too, literally turned the matchsticks. It's incredible. But we don't see heavy equipment, do you? But we do see the roads are cleared off a bit. But it doesn't look like they've done a very good job. At least it's cleared off for a vehicle to get through. But I mean, that's matchsticks. It's crazy how these houses, like, that's unbelievable. It turned to matchsticks. That's a violent, very violent earthquake to turn that to matchsticks. That's liquefaction you're looking at right there, where it just sunk down into it. There's more liquefactions. And again, you can see the liquefactions of the house where I don't know if it shows. Oh, I think we zoom in here and we get some more. That's liquefaction again, where it dropped down into the earth, like I think he said 30 centimeters. He built the house, not that guy, but the other guy. Hey, everybody got your cardboard, a little cubby hole, a little cubicle? Well, you're never going back home. Like, they had, last year they had 8,000 small earthquakes. In 2020, they had, the average before that was 20 a year. In 2021, they had 8,000 earthquakes. Small ones, but 8,000. Perceivable, right? 2022 was 8,000. 2023 was 8,000. So you should have moved out of there. You knew that was coming. And the fault line, the rupture was around 3,000 to 4,000 years old. It's been dormant for 3,000 or 4,000 years. And some of the stories we covered, they admitted that this is going to rupture again, and that the rupture was only a fraction of what it should rupture. So it's definitely going to rupture again. And now they got a few places where you can have your pets, thank goodness. Because a lot of people wouldn't leave their pets. And so they were suffering. The government abandoned them for almost a month now. Like the outside areas, the government went in and gave them help because they were accessible, right? But the peninsula was basically, and we, as far as we know, there's still communities there that are still cut off. Look at this destruction, though. Isn't that something? Like matchsticks, right? But yet it's not cleared away. This is 4 weeks later. Why, oh why, oh why, isn't the roads clear after 4 weeks? Every community got bulldozers and excavators and plows and backhoes and stuff like that. So why isn't it cleared? I don't understand it. It just, I've never seen this before, and so we're very concerned there's a nuclear meltdown at the Shika nuclear power plant. Fuel pool at the #1 reactor because of the absurd headlines we've seen. Now they're bringing out mobile post office after 4 weeks. But when you see the damage from a 4,000-year-old fault line that just ruptured, then why would you rebuild here? Because you know this is going to happen over and over and over and over for 4,000 years. So when you look at the original footage, and these pictures don't do it justice though, right? Every telephone pole, everything, every tree, everything is going like this. Everything. It's surreal. I can honestly say I don't know if I've ever seen a video similar. And fires and landslides and just, well, that's Fukushima, obviously. And the pavement just, it was like it's brittle, right? It's unbelievable. And this was, can't remember, this was early in the earthquake. This is pictures we missed. But we didn't get much detail, right? Even, we're almost a month in there. And until we can prove that the Shika nuclear power plant didn't melt down, I got to keep investigating it. We've been investigating it now for 29 days. And the evidence strongly suggests we have a meltdown at the Shika nuclear power plant. And this fault line is ruptured now after 3,000 to 4,000 years. So why would you rebuild in a place like that? Are they going to just keep covering the destruction? I mean, look at it's unbelievable how much damage and over how big of an area we're talking about. And they downplayed the daylights out of it. At the Shika, the town where the nuclear power plant is too, they said it was a 7 out of a 7 scale, which is a Shindu scale, which is the biggest earthquake you can get. And that scale is how they use that scale to quantify how much money they're going to locate to an area. They don't go by the damage, they go by the Shindu scale. So when you got a 7 out of a 7 on the Shindu scale, which is the biggest earthquake Japan can have, which is the animosity equivalent of the Richter scale, a 10 out of a 10 on the Richter scale. So this picture came out, this was day 3 or something, or day 2, I can't remember. But I remember when I first seen that picture, and I said to myself, oh boy, we're going to see some crazy footage. And they hid everything from us, and we've had to go through massive amount of searching to find just a basic documentation. And we finally built the story to where now we can say, you know, there's a major cover-up going on, obviously. There's so many discrepancies in the official story and then the pictures and the reality. That's up in Suzu, where for the first couple of days they said 4,500 of the 9,000 homes were completely destroyed. And then they stopped talking about that. No explanation. They say over 160 boats capsized. 160 boats. That's the first time I heard that one. And liquefaction was spread very wide. Struggling with coal and supply shortages. And you can kind of see the road is completely deformed. Landslides. And this landslide, look at these rocks, man. My goodness. Look at these trees. So they got over 1,500 aftershocks. This is Wajima again. Utter destruction, eh? And we even today, you know, like, it was really interesting because Wajima, we didn't see fire trucks. We didn't see any heavy equipment. Even when they had 100 police there shifting through this, we didn't see heavy equipment. It's the strangest thing, isn't it? Because, you know, you would use heavy equipment to remove these cars and these logs and everything else so you can look under that debris also, right? But we didn't see it. And how often in these pictures have you seen heavy equipment? Look at the damage on that road. It's crazy. And getting water is insane. Yeah, 160 ships, by some accounts, have capsized or sunk. And I don't speak Japanese, so it's hard for me to articulate what we're looking at on that map there. But it's obviously suggesting severe damage for the entire peninsula, right? And again, you get these grainy shots. Thank goodness you get something. But you can see the damage. My, oh my, oh my. But no heavy equipment, no ambulances, no backhoes, no dump trucks, not a single dump truck, no excavators. So now they're going to replace the train service with buses. And they're long hauls. A typical 2-hour drive is now 7 or 8 hours, which is going to be even longer when it comes to buses. They just started doing that. Seismic activity is persisting 4 weeks later. Well, let me go back for a second. And we haven't got any pictures of the mountains. And we'd like to see pictures of the mountains. Well, let me explain that to you. Why? I, in particular, would like to see pictures, airplane pictures of the mountains. It's a doozy. Hang on, wait for it. So the Hokkaido earthquake, we've seen some pretty wild stuff from Hokkaido. So look at this landslide. So that's not really a mountain, right? That's a pretty impressive landslide, though. I guess that is a mountain, right? But let's step back a little bit further. And you notice the landslides are huge landslides for very long areas. So step back a little bit further, and you're starting to see all the mountains have landslides. All of them. This was only considered a 6.6 earthquake officially. Have you ever seen anything like that before? And here you step back even further, and you can see all sides of the mountains as far as you can see. Is that why we're not seeing airborne pictures of the Noto Peninsula, because it looks like that? Is that why we're not seeing any airborne? Is that why they wouldn't let anybody fly over it? Is that why they wouldn't let the Americans, the Chinese, the Indians, and many other countries go in there with the search and rescue? They wouldn't even let the self-defense force go in. No one flew in there. Because those pictures, by the way, are 2018. They hid that earthquake. That was in Hokkaido. And that was about 25 kilometers from a nuclear power plant. So back to today's stuff. We already covered that, didn't we? Yeah, I smurfed up. I already covered that. Let's go down here. $1,500 quakes on Japanese scale of 1 on the country, of 1 on a scale of 0, at least 1 on a scale of 0 to 7. So 1 is a 1.428 on the Richter scale. The agency is urging people to stay vigilant for quakes with an intensity of around an upper 5 or higher, and that the January 1st quake registered a 7. So it was a 7. It was the worst quake you can have, which is on their scale, which is 7. And Taiwan uses the same scale. And if you look up Taiwan earthquakes, you'll understand why they're using the 7 scale is to manipulate you, right? The January 1st quake registered as 7 on the country scale of 0 to 7. So it's the worst quake you can have. And so you've got to assume that the reason we're not seeing any airborne footage is, 1, the mountains have lost their payloads, and there's a good possibility there's a meltdown at the Shika nuclear power plant number 1 reactor. And we say the number 1 reactor because of the headlines they fed us, where they claimed they had an upper 5 on Japan's seismic intensity scale of 7 in the base. This is Japan Times, mind you, on top of the government itself, in the basement of the number 1 reactor. So why would you say something like that? Because the number 2 reactor is only 100 feet away. I don't even think it's 100 feet away. Useful information. Experts warn of hypothermia at the evacuation centers. So they still haven't got generators at the evacuation. There's over 400 evacuation centers. So you wouldn't have to worry about hypothermia unless you don't have any generators. You still don't got generators to these victims. And blankets, and it's unbelievable. I can honestly say I don't know of another instance where they've done this. Emergency loans are available. You got to pay it back, obviously. 200,000 yen, which is 1,800 Canadian. So if that's your house and you got to pay back the $1,800, how are you going to feel? Suzu City, Ishikawa Prefecture, accepts application for disaster victims certificates. Began accepting applications as a prerequisite for receiving public assistance. The city was heavily damaged by the earthquake and the tsunami, by the way, which measured an upper 6 in the Japanese seismic intensity scale of 1 to 7. But their scale goes 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 6. 6.5 is a lower, and 7 is an upper, so it's a 7 out of a 7. See how deceptive that scale actually is? Great British Nuclear working to create senior opportunities for women. Farms right up to the nuclear power plants. The whole plant is surrounded by farms. This is how complacent we actually are. Look. The fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation into the environment. Those tall, skinny stacks. The radiation is hemorrhaging into the farms 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I mean hemorrhaging. It's like an invisible snowstorm non-stop. So Great British Nuclear is working to create senior opportunities for women. Great British Nuclear is a new organization. They do this to create all these new organizations because they're such a failure every time. International Atomic Energy Agency's mission sees progress in nuclear and radiation safety in the United Kingdom. So now that United Kingdom, France, they need another $13 billion for their nuclear reactor, which is insane. The International Atomic Energy Agency and other medias are coming out trying to promote the British nuclear. Disgusting that the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is just a corporation, has no sovereignty over any country, got their own flag on top of that. And put on a pedestal by Hollywood and the media and governments, given prominence everywhere when they don't deserve any prominence. They're actually demonic, sadistic demons. The team also identified areas for further enhancements, including need to effectively recruit and retain regulatory specialists and inspectors. There's lots of scumbags out there. Don't worry, you'll get them, guys. It'll happen. Nuclear industry has no problem attracting scumbags. That's one thing they're really exceptional at. In fact, anybody who wants to work for the International Atomic Energy Agency, right, should automatically get a lifetime in jail because you know they're going to murder everything they come in contact with. The country's 9 nuclear power reactors provide just over 14% of the country's electricity. And that's because they've been ramping up the production on these brittle reactors. They're very old, they're high pressure, and they're brittle from decades of neutron bombardments, which compromises the integrity of the cement in the middle and creates this very brittle atmosphere. UK government recently announced its plan to quadruple UK nuclear power by 2050. Anybody believe they can do that? Quadruple their power? So ridiculous. EDF Hinkley Point woes pile pressure on the global nuclear push. And so the media will come out now to defend it and praise it up. And they need another $13 billion. They went from, the original estimate was $8 billion. They're now at $59 billion or $49 billion or whatever it is. Well, it's $59 billion US. 90 billion Canadian or something ridiculous. The original estimate was $8 billion. They need another $13 billion now. They're still a decade away. They're going to need another $13 billion in 2 or 3 years. You can mark that down, take that to the bank. EDF Hinkley Point woes pile pressure on the global nuclear push. Thank goodness. The world's finally coming to its senses, isn't it? In 2016, France's EDF signed up to build Britain's first nuclear power plant in 2 decades. And defenders of the costly Hinkley Point C project included Emmanuel Macron, who was then the economy minister. And if we believe in nuclear power, we have to do Hinkley Point. which is a ridiculous statement, isn't it? They can't even build their own reactors. How are they going to build anybody else's? State-backed EDF, which is already struggling to deliver a new French prototype plant in Normandy, may not have the financial bandwidth to take on the British site, originally estimated to cost $18 billion. Now, when they first proposed the idea, it was $8 billion. We covered it a couple of days ago. French ministers are trying to get the British state to stump up. Yeah, the British have so much confidence that they barely throw a nickel that way. Some support for the soaring Hinkley bill, which could reach a total of $46 billion at today's prices for the 2 reactors. It's going to be a lot more than that. They're at least, they're at least a decade away from completion if they get lucky and can keep the pace going right now. And the odds of that is 0. A plan for 1 reactor, flame build in France, that is running 4 times over budget, it was $13 billion. It's 4 times over budget. All right, so the 2 reactors should have been $8 billion. Degenerates, man, these people. Kazakhstan's action to address nuclear and biological risk. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, Kazakhstan found itself in possession of the world's 4th largest nuclear weapons stockpile and the former Union's most significant biological weapons factories. And a lot of these scientists were exported to the United States and hired by the United States. A lot of them were just given, I think it was like several thousand a month, which is a lot of money in their countries, right? The biological weapons experts, to stop them from getting jobs somewhere else, right? And then eventually, if they weren't too maniacal, or if they were maniacal enough, they were imported into America and United Kingdom. U.S. Nuclear Agency isn't consistent in tracking cost of of any construction projects. That's quite the read, too. And here we are, like farmers, right there, showing you crops. It's very subtle how you do it a lot of the times. Now, normally I would go out and find a air picture, like an aircraft picture of that site. I forgot to do it this time, and I apologize. The U.S. agency in charge, nobody's in charge of the nuclear. The nuclear is completely out of control. Difficult to prevent delays and cost overruns. And congressional investigators says in a report released, well, there's no oversight, there's no accountability, there's no incentive not to be evil. Guess what happens? And we cover it constantly here. Evil is the rule of the day. Canada and Oppenheimer raced the Doomsday clock. No Oscars for Canada. Well, yeah, Canada should get tons of Oscars for its performance, claiming that nuclear is carbon-free and green and too cheap to meter for all these decades. You should definitely get an Oscar. Vile people, aren't they? Advanced nuclear power is costly and the tech is still developing. Is the Pueblo plant realistic? Well, a committee of 11 local leaders championed advanced nuclear, small modular reactors, as the best replacement for the Comanche coal plant earlier this month. Why would you champion something that doesn't exist? Like, really, there's so many scumbags for the nuclear industry that they'll beat each other up to get media attention. So again, we see this connotation, this narrative, this framing of the narratives. A 10-month study of potential replacements found that advanced nuclear, which doesn't exist, would provide between 200 to 300 long-term jobs and pay salaries ranging from $60,000 to $200,000 and provide the county with $95 million in annual property tax payments. So the incentive is greed, right? And that's how they lull you into complacency, is this greed. But we see this type of connotation constantly. And of course, it says that yeah, small modular nuclear reactors is the best solution. But it doesn't exist. How can you say something that doesn't exist is the solution? And she already looks like she's dead, don't she? Bless her heart. But it's just this, there's this disconnect. I shouldn't insult people by their looks. She's insult them by their actions, right? I apologize for doing that. That's her name there, Frances Consilja. Disagrees with the notion that advanced nuclear is too expensive and can't be built on time. She told the chieftain that having a small modular nuclear reactor at the Comanche 3 site by 2030 may be a bit of a stretch, but 2034 is possible. Like the ratepayers have already paid to replace the site, and nuclear, memorandums of understanding shouldn't be dispersed because the industry doesn't exist. And yes, you might be able to build one, but it'll be an experimental one, right? The mass production won't come to fruition for at least 30 years or more. But the same amount of money, you can just do geothermal and have twice the energy you would with nuclear in 2 years instead of 25 or 30. So why would you do anything else? The U.S. Department of Energy has demonstrated enthusiasm by announcing plans to invest $2 billion in the project, which is a TerraPower Bill Gates fake nuclear reactor that doesn't exist. Right, it's like NuScale, right? NuScale is the only one that even looked like it had a possibility, and it was a total scam. It was a 100% Ponzi scheme. And they stole money from the investors, the current investors, to pay the older investors, and then they siphon off what they can in between. They sell their stocks, right? By announcing plans to invest $2 billion, so Department of Energy has all, how much money they're located to the nuclear or the geothermal? It's like $90 million. But they're dumping $2 billion on this one, $2 billion on this project, $1 billion on that project, $9 billion on fusion projects, billions on nuclear here, billions. All the universities are getting all kinds of money to produce nuclear academics, nuclear engineers, nuclear scientists. But none of them are putting money in for the geothermal. Geothermal can replace everything. No solutions are allowed on nuclear. And so fusion, literally the stupidest thing imaginable. Control the lighting. Where are we at with nuclear fusion? It's a 100% embarrassment. Nuclear fusion is an embarrassment. The most sophisticated contraptions on the planet, they say. Like they're building the so-called reactors, but they're not reactors, they're just experiments. Aims to investigate the feasibility of fusion as a safe, large-scale, and carbon-free net energy source. You don't need it. You need geothermal. Why are you looking at anything but geothermal? And you can say it's so easy to solve geothermal. Like the biggest problem with geothermal is digging deep enough, drilling deep enough. And many of these companies have already solved it, and it's come to fruition in 2024. But they refuse to put that into conversation. They refuse to let humanity have a future. That's what they're doing. Oh, forgot to turn the mic off again. Everybody got to listen to Dana gargle, gargle, gargle. Barbarino, a nuclear plasma fusion specialist at the International Atomic Energy Agency. Well, you can't have a fusion specialist when it doesn't exist. We have a fusion theorist, but you can't have a fusion specialist. Why are you quoting the International Atomic Energy Agency for? Like, how the hell can they have credibility when they're out there trying to tell you there's no emissions from Fukushima? Period. Nothing. Just 2.2 grams of tritium. So shouldn't they be excluded from all conversations? Doesn't that make sense? Thorium will solve the nuclear problem, or at least this startup thinks so. And so Transmutex is, you're talking about mixed oxide fuel again. So you got all these startups, and they get all the attention, they get all the money. Geothermal, which exists, is easy to do. Planned progress to bring U.S. nuclear weapons to United Kingdom again. Imagine that flying over your friggin' house. Fucking scum, man. Excuse the language. Can the world meet the UN Climate Summit's nuclear goal? Why is the UN Climate Summit the arbiter of our futures? Tripling nuclear capacity may not be possible and may not be the point. So why are we talking about it? Because you're not allowed to have a conversation about realistic stuff. You got to talk about fantasies. That's this kooky, earth-destructive industries doing to us. I mean, the UN Climate Summit is absurd. It's absurd what they're doing each year. And now they're promoting nuclear in your face. Like, this is what we got a poll to make, by the way. Is the endless nuclear radioactive fallout the biggest threat to the species and humanity? Well, nothing else is a threat to humanity when you compare it to nuclear. Nothing compares to nuclear evil. UK nuclear recap: major funding for small modular reactors in Sizewell C. Not geothermal, not solutions, but for idiots. Right? You put all your eggs into one basket over and over and over, and humanity loses. The country raises potentially triple nuclear capacity up to 24 gigawatts by 2050. Well, the money they got in to Sizewell would give you 11 gigawatts in just a couple of years of geothermal. Twice the energy you're going to have with that nuclear site if you ever get it finished. And it won't surprise me to see that go another 15 years. And then they show you these small modular reactors. They all look the same. They look like ice cream buckets cut in half and then flipped over upside down. And it'll never look like this. An artist's rendition of the Hitachi's boiling water reactors, 300 megawatt units. And Holtec always got his dirty, grubby little hands in everything. Like, every time I see this picture of Hinkley Point, I kind of freak out a little bit because they used up all the precious metal we got on the planet. Literally, to get this far in this thing. The world's biggest cranes. They got cranes there. You can't look anywhere without a crane. And the place is actually surrounded by farms on top of that, as far as the eye can see. All the better to poison you with. And the resources you're looking at is just as a fraction of the site. It's the biggest construction site on the entire planet, and they can't open their friggin' pie hole without saying the word carbon-free for some reason. This is the most resource-intensive thing in human history. Welcome to scumbag Hinkley Point. And this little sack of shit right there, Stuart Crook, he's got the right name, Crook. He's a weasel. That's what he is. He's an actual weasel. Look at this weasel. This is a weasel. At nighttime, he's out there crawling around in ditches. That's a weasel. It's the heart of the first nuclear power station. And he's reading placards. He's reading cards. He stood outdoors. And if you watch the video, look at the resources. There's enough cement there to build a sidewalk to Rome, for Christ's sakes. And he's reading this placard. And Hinkley Point C, helping Britain achieve net zero, which is a paper written by Miles Allen. It was weaponized by United Nations against humanity now. These people are insane. They're actually insane to even suggest the word net zero. Can you imagine? Let me go backwards for a second. Can you imagine how much friggin' electricity it takes to do this every single day. There's 7,000 people on that site, by the way. Can you imagine how much electricity they need to dedicate it to gas, oil, and coal plants? Like 2 gas, 2 oil, 2 coal, or 1 gas, 1 oil, or 1 oil, 1 coal. You need 2 dedicated large power plants to build it, to run it for its life, and then for 100 years to decommission the site. Think about how much electricity it takes to do what they're doing there. Why is it surrounded by farms? Why is this dome head right there? He's reading placards. And you can tell when you hear him talking, you know he's a weasel. Look at all the farms in the background. Look at all the carbon free. It's so ridiculous. Like the industry, that's who they are. Right? They know, they hire the inbreeds all the time, but that's what they're just a bunch of inbreeds. And they don't care about anything. They don't even care about themselves. They probably ship their children off to military school when they're 7 years old because you can't stand them, right? That creature right there, Stuart, that's a friggin' crook and a weasel. He's there reading his placards, and the stuff he's reading is just ridiculous. Nobody talks like this. How much electricity, this is only a fraction of the site. How much electricity does it take to run all of this each day? How much resources and precious metals that are all going to be bombarded with neutrons? That's a friggin' weasel right there. There's nothing he won't say to get you to go away and stop paying attention to the disease factors that they really are. Every single day I hate him just a whole lot more. Every single day. Because the contempt that they have for us and the species, there's no limit to their contempt for us. And they prove that every day that they exist. Oak Ridge nuclear waste will be recycled to power space exploration and deep sea research. Nuclear waste will be recycled to power mixed oxide fuel, basically. And so they got a couple of, they're demolishing a very old test reactor, low intensity test reactors. But all the test reactors are small reactors that they're using in universities. They do sex ratio studies in the communities because they know everybody was contaminated. But ripping apart these dirty reactor buildings are going to release huge radiation into the environment. That's what they're doing. Look at them. They're just ripping it apart. It's incredible. And they're spraying it with water. You see it there in the background? And some of those pictures you would have seen it, I think. And so they're going to take the stuff from that reactor. And look at these guys. You don't see them suits at Fukushima, do you? Fukushima is infinitely worse than that site. And these suits can't protect you that close to a reactor. Or that can't protect you. It's a scumbag industry, no matter how you look at it. To bring power to the most remote places on Earth and the dark side of the moon. Why are you going to the dark side of the moon? Why aren't you going to the sunny side of the moon where your solar panels will work indefinitely? Why would you go to the dark side of the moon? It doesn't make any sense at all. Why are you going to go to... What are you trying to hide? That there's no one there? Zeno Power joins forces with Oak Ridge Office and Environmental Management and the cleanup contractor United Cleanup Oak Ridge. Because you don't have to clean up, they'll give the nuclear waste to Zeno Power, who will make dirty bombs out of it and put it in our oceans and in satellites. And Zeno Power is a startup founded by 3 Vanderbilt University students in 2018. So, why wouldn't you let well-established companies deal with the nuclear waste? Why are you going to let kids who don't know jack shit as their first venture deal with nuclear waste? Because you're scumbags? Oh, that's right, because that's what you are, you're scumbags. And who are these kids? Are they scumbags too? Oh, that's right, they're scumbags too, as you'll see. Plans to use the radioactive fuel for the generators to develop a new kind of power generator for customers like the Department of Defense and NASA. So they sold their souls for a paycheck. They're just another stupid little scumbags, right? Another little dummies. Tyler Dummy Bernstein, co-founder and CEO of Stupid Power, said he hopes the partnership will bring him lots of money so he can get all kinds of hookers when he's on vacation. And a set of precedents for how private companies can work with the U.S. government to turn waste into clean energy. It'll never be clean energy. You despicable little creatures. This is from the Vanderbilt University School of Engineering. Xeno Power, Vanderbilt University's team makes an impact through innovation. What are you talking about innovation? By manipulating people and letting them use nuclear waste for something that it has no right to do with it? By converting recycled nuclear waste, aka mixed oxide fuel, into electricity resulting in clean power. There is no such thing as clean power in nuclear, you disgusting maggots. Now look at these two little morons. These two little dummies who spent time in the military apparently, which means they got no credibility whatsoever. And they're going to put it deep in the ocean too. These dirty bombs. And they're doing it for the Pentagon and the military because that's what little inbreeds do, right? You know they're inbreeds. As soon as you look at them, you're like, yeah, there's two inbreeds. That's the only reason they're getting their foot in this door. You're not getting your foot in the door if you're not an inbreed, that's for sure. The NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory also invited them to a full-day brainstorming session. NASA wanted to pick their brains, where they discovered compelling uses of their technology for space missions that are infeasible with current power sources. And NASA is the scumbag who brought us James Hansen, right? So I'll hate NASA for the rest of my life just because of James Hansen. I have many other reasons, but just James Hansen is a pretty good reason to hate NASA. We strongly believe in scumbag nuclear power as part of the portfolio of dirty clean energy sources to achieve carbon neutrality. Like, you little piece of shits to say something like that. You little maggots. You little parasites. Oh, and to fight climate change, says shit for brains Siegel. And then they give him a title like Chief Operating Officers. He probably still wets the bed at fucking night, for Christ's sakes. They get $30 million for the first commercially developed nuclear powered satellite. Why? Because NASA's too stupid to do it themselves? Department of Energy is too stupid to do it themselves? All the big companies that exist are too stupid to do it themselves? And only these little morons can do it? Only these little inbreeds can do it? Is that it? And private investors. Like what? Because Rod Adams, believe it or not, is a capital investor right now. He's going around investing all kinds of projects like this. It's absurd that Rod Adams would have access to that kind of money, by the way. Expected first launch of a commercially developed space nuclear system in history. As soon as you look at them, this is two little despicable, degenerate inbreeds. And there's nothing they won't do for a decent paycheck. And it's an easy paycheck for them, right? Everything's going to be handed to them. And if anything goes wrong, they take the blame. They couldn't care less. They're kids. Like, they're actual idiots. There's tons of people out there working at McDonald's with engineering degrees. A degree doesn't make you a good person, for fuck's sakes. On the dark side of the moon. Why are you putting rovers on the dark side of the moon? Like, it's so stupid. Over 5 years later, we're thrilled to be on track to deliver the first commercially developed nuclear power satellite to the government, which is the military-industrial complex they're talking about. which is the Pentagon. They won a $7.5 million Pentagon contract for underwater nuclear-powered systems. Look at this. It's horrifying that these people actually think that they're good people. They actually think that they're important. They actually think that they're humans. And then the arrogance to show fish swimming around. There's barely any fish left out there. Zeno maintains offices in Seattle as well as Washington, D.C. So they're living high on the hog. Haven't produced anything yet. They're living like royalty. And they got to treat them that way, otherwise they're going to fade away, right? They'll give them all kinds of awards too, right? They'll gotta wear tuxedos. And that's shocking. And they're also, one of his partners in the program is Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin space venture. That's disturbing, to say the least. And such a system could open the way for a long-endurance seafloor sensor system and charging stations under the ocean for autonomous undersea vehicles for the Pentagon. Do you hear that? They're going to build charging stations for... My God, boy. That's horrifying. I should have barely had a diapers. Yeah, they were in the military. So they're useful idiots. Good for them. They're used to being told what to do all day, every day. They're used to people pulling rank on them all day, every day. They're good little slaves. The world's oceans are increasingly becoming hotbeds of international competition. Only because these little inbreeds make it possible. These greedy little fuckers make it possible. The restart of the Sitka nuclear power plant likely to take years. Now remember, this picture was a major media. It was supposed to be on the 2nd. This one they say is on the 3rd. And it's the same picture, though, that we've seen, except it's cropped, right? See how it's cropped? It's the same picture. We've showed this before. All the media shows it. We got 51 votes. Is endless nuclear radioactive fallout the biggest threat to the species and humanity? God bless you, folks. The screening process to restart a reactor at the Sitka nuclear plant will likely be prolonged, as a belt of active faults may have seen seismic activity. May have seen. Like, the community had a 7 out of a 7 friggin' earthquake, for Christ's sakes. It's not may have, that's a positive. And because that fault has been silent for 3,000 to 4,000 years. So this is what you call posturing, right? The idea is to make you think there's no damage at this disease factory. We believe there's a nuclear meltdown. And the fault line runs right alongside of Sitka, right through the community. The community was a 7 out of a 7 on Japanese Shindu seismic intensity scale. And it says 105 kilometer long fault line. Much time has been spent checking whether the fault under the station's premises were active. Well, they said they have an upper 5 in Japan's seismic intensity scale of 7 under the Reactor 1 reactor. Then they said it extends to 150 kilometers. So why didn't they show us that one? There may have been other faults, active faults around the nuclear station, both on land and on the sea. A tremor measuring upper 5 in Japan's seismic intensity scale hit the Sitka power station on the January 1st earthquake. So you had an upper 5, which is a 6, on Japan's scale of 7, which is an 8.4 on the Richter scale, hit the plant and there's no damage. So why don't you show us live footage? How come nobody's flown over it? How come we only get that one picture over and over and over from all the media? And then they said the plant has a total of 1,657 nuclear fuel rods. Fuel rods. 1,657. We must be cooling the fuel pools using external power supply. So you're talking about 18 assemblies at 2 reactors that are 40 fucking years old. You piece of shits. You despicable scum, man. You disgusting scum to write something like that. You revolting scumbags. 1,657 nuclear fuel rods is only 18 assemblies. Fukushima Reactor 4 had 1,500 assemblies. And that was just for that building. These reactors are the exact same copies and the same ages. But they only got 18 assemblies. These are the worst of the worst of human. Everything nuclear is the worst of the worst, isn't it? Okay, well that's it. That's what we got tonight. That's what we got. That's all of it. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you made it this far. Let's close the poll down, I guess. How'd the poll do? We got 51 votes. Woohoo! 45 likes. Sweet. Give us a couple more. Come on, don't be so shy. We're going to end the poll. Just one fuel rod is too much. There you go, James. Nailed it. Thank you, James. Good night, everybody. Albert. How did they get the Coke across? That's a 7 out of a 7. Hi, everybody. Good night, everybody. Hugs for everybody. Sue donated another 200. Thank you, Sue. My goodness. Bless your heart. Perfect timing. Brilliant timing, actually. That's it for me tonight. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. I was 15 minutes late. 15 minutes late tonight because I fell asleep. I was there plowing snow. And I went sleepy on the chair when I was waiting. I was sat there about to post the show and I woke up. I was like, oh shit, never even posted the show. I'm such a pathetic sleeper sometimes. Have a great night. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Take care, folks.